let me switch my screen here. Which one is it? Is it this one? Yes. Okay. Uh-oh. Camera's busted. There we go. Okay. So let's see what this is all about. This video is from Writing on Games. So if you want to look that up, Writing on Games, I'll leave a link in the description. You can check it out yourself.
For this, you still want more? I do make videos that you can't get here, available exclusively on Patreon. For as little as $1, get more videos and support the work I do on massive projects like this by heading to patreon.com/writingongames. Thanks for your support, and now on with the show. When announcing their upcoming project at 2022's Game Awards, From Software knew exactly what they were doing. Not a year earlier, the company had released Elden Ring, the game that took the Souls formula they had been honing for over a decade and managed to catapult.
It is insane, the success of Elden Ring. That is pretty absurd, because I am a Dark Souls veteran. So to see a game like Elden Ring come out and get people who were not Souls game enthusiasts into the genre is kind of ridiculous. It's great though. I mean, it's a good game for a reason. It won Game of the Year. It almost won Game of the Year again with its DLC. So, you know.
To even past the ravenous cult fandom the series had accrued up to that point. This very game was about to win Miyazaki and co. the top prize at this very event. Elden Ring wasn't just mainstream, it was one of the biggest game releases in years.
I didn't know they did 20
million. It was all anyone
million.
could talk about. And
20
so,
million's
despite
crazy.
the game's gargantuan size and density of secrets, 10 months from its release, discussion was already rampant about what the studio had in store next for Elden Ring. Or hell, even that Bloodborne PC port everyone's been craving.
That's not happening ever. I don't know why it's not happening. It's just not. I mean, there's a community mod for it. There are some people in the Souls community that are working hard to make things, you know, function properly, and they've almost got it. I looked into it. They've almost got it nailed down. But until they do it, FromSoft, I mean, that's not right. FromSoft, I don't think is ever going to do it. But until it's perfected by the community, we're not getting Bloodborne on PC. Perfect, you know, as much as we want it.
The big reveal occurred, with host Jeff Keighley clearly tingling with anticipatory reverence. So began a cinematic in which FromSoft played directly into that anticipation. Mentions of feeding the fire and the last cinders burning saw the developer place established series language against footage that felt as if it could have been lifted directly from Dark Souls. This is it, everyone, Elden Ring DLC in the Dark Souls universe, here we go! And then a big robot appeared. The FromSoft logo alone was probably enough to get people.
My friend Abe was geeking about this. He lost his mind when he saw this trailer.
Incredibly hyped, a rather amusing, heartening signifier of the developer's completed transition from the mid-tier status it once had to its logo now being a marker of abundant quality. But as the trailer went on and it presented dazzling image after dazzling image, it became more and more obvious that this had nothing to do with Elden Ring or Bloodborne or Souls.
It became more and more obvious. The giant mechs with guns made it more obvious that it wasn't an Elden Ring game or a Souls game. Is that what we're understanding?
Of any kind. At the end of it all, a robot enters combat mode, and the flare from its thrusters reveals the title. Fires of Rubicon, a return to FromSoft's other major franchise,
I've heard
Armored
really
Core,
good things about
the sixth
this.
numbered installment
What up, Nova?
in the
How are you, dude?
decades-long series.
I saw you
can
on
see from the
Night
comments and the multiple think pieces at the time that this was something that made a portion of the audience unbelievably happy, yet seemed to have far more people asking, okay, this looks cool, but how much like Elden Ring is it going to be? See, for as dedicated as its fan base is, I'd say Armored Core is a franchise currently
like
occupying the kind of niche that the Souls games once did.
Nice.
The wider
I
audience
played,
now has a
Everdorf Price Up the other
familiarity
night.
with what Soulsborne games are all about after all this
Took me like 5 times to beat him, which is funny because I beat him first try the other day, and then back to back I just couldn't get it. So
time, and so speculation inevitably turned to how FromSoft might modernize Armored Core to meet audience expectations. I mean, I have to admit, I was one of those people. My familiarity with the Armored Core series more or less extended to an old demo disc I got with the first game on it. And while that was a long time ago, I remember it seeming very odd and complicated, and despite my love of giant mechs, it's not something I ever really thought to delve into. Critical reception, which back in the day was something that could very much make or break a game's popularity, generally saw the series framed as this weird curio that would put out all kinds of sequels to sequels and spin-offs, with none of them really grabbing the attention of the wider, more...
I didn't realize when Armored Core 6, right? 5, 6. I don't know. One of them. I have it confused. I didn't realize when that new one dropped a couple years ago. It had been 10 years since the last one dropped. Also, they did mobile games, apparently. I found that the other day. I don't know what it is with companies doing mobile games. They were for Java flip phones back in the day. Ugh. Ryan, what up, dude? How are you? Good to see you, dude. We're learning about Armored Core. As I go through the series, I figured it'd be best if we could learn about this together. This is a nice little summary video. So, never played them? Yeah, the new one is the new one's gotten a shit ton of good reviews. Also, you know what? Since you guys are here, real quick, check this out. The hat came in. So Nova, here's a preview of what your hat looks like. I'd say it turned out pretty well. The shirt did pretty well as well. Pretty well as well? I think the shirt's pretty fire. Tad pricey, but that's okay. Who cares? Also, since at least 2 over here, you can witness this thing I've always wanted to do on stream because I thought it'd be really funny. Now that I have a stream deck, I can actually do this. Let's just pretend I said something controversial. I'm not gay no more. I am delivered. Anyway.
Dream critical sphere, as evidenced by a very funny video I stumbled across, lightly poking fun at Keely's aforementioned deferential gravitas as he talks about the groundbreaking new reveal from this venerated developer.
Maybe it jump scared you because you're a pussy. All right, I'll adjust the volume. Hang on. There. Nah, I just wasn't expecting it. Bro doesn't expect anything.
Developer placing it alongside footage of his review of Armored Core 4, whose number coincidentally matches up with the score he ended up giving that game, completely trashing it.
Oh, the volume's fine? Okay, well in that case.
A lot has changed since 2006, but it does give something of a frame of reference against expectations. I mean, I have to admit, I was one of those people. My familiarity with the Armored Core series more or less extended to an old demo disc I got with the first game on it. And while that was a long time ago, I remember it seeming very odd and complicated, and despite my love of giant mechs, it's not something I ever really thought to delve into. Critical reception, which back in the day was something that could very much make or break a game's popularity,
it almost looks like the stream
generally
crashes.
saw the series framed as this weird curio that would put out all kinds of sequels
like
to
that
sequels and
3 FPS
spin-offs,
Spider-Man
with none of them really grabbing the attention of the wider, more mainstream critical sphere, as evidenced by a very funny video I stumbled across, lightly poking fun at Keely's aforementioned deferential gravitas as he talks about the groundbreaking new reveal from this venerated developer, placing it alongside footage of his review of Armored Core 4, whose number coincidentally matches up with the score he ended up giving that game, completely trashing it in the process. Obviously, it's totally fine. None of this matters at all. It's all in good humor. As the video states, a lot has changed since 2006, but it does give something of a frame of reference for where the series was at the time. The intro splash screens of these games reveal a cavalcade of different publishers, seemingly for each release appearing alongside
Ubisoft.
Some big names, a lot of odd names, many that don't exist anymore, all suggesting that this series was something of a hot potato, with seemingly no one publisher wanting to commit to anything longer than a chance taken, a punt. Making it all the more surprising then, that Armored Core managed to maintain as consistent a release schedule as it did for so long. What I'm saying is that, like a great many people, the series never grabbed me back in the day. I looked at this trailer for 6 and thought, this looks amazing, but it's a cinematic trailer. You can't really take much concrete information from that. That is, until I decided to go back and play the older games.
It's hard, bro. I tried playing the first mission last night. I booted up the old, like the 1997 Armored Core, the first one. It is weird. It's clunky.
For myself. Indeed, after a slight adjustment period that I'll outline in a minute, and subsequently rolling credits on almost every numbered AC entry, it's complicated, as well as a number of the spin-offs and sequels, but not all of them, again, it's complicated.
I'm not looking forward to fighting
this
that guy.
piece will annoy certain people wondering why I didn't go in-depth on their favorite AC game, sorry in advance, all over the span of a few weeks. I found that, yes, of course it is a very different...
Camera crashed.
I imagine some people are going to feel a bit alienated blindly entering the fires of Rubicon. And there's also now a significant part of me that doesn't want FromSoft to try and match the Elden Ring experience in almost any way, despite the significant differences between installments and the very real ways in which it has seemingly influenced the Soulsborne formula. Armored Core is very much its own thing, and I, for one, want that identity to be preserved.
Hang on, troubleshooting moments. We're going to sit here on this screen while I unplug my camera and fix it. Give me 1 sec. All right, let me see if this fixed it. Okay. It crashes again. I don't know what's going on. Computer just might not like the fact that I'm doing so many things at once, which is fair. Let me actually try closing out a couple things. There we go. Okay, hopefully that fixes it.
As much as possible. All this to say, why don't more people talk about how incredible this series is? Why didn't someone tell me sooner? Where has Armored Core been all my life? Obviously that's a joke, it's been right there the whole time, my ignorance is on me, but I cannot remember the last time an entire series that had just been out there ready to play, although it's not so simple a process if you want to do it by the official means, we'll come on to that later, has gone on to hook me quite like Armored Core has. I cannot stop thinking about this goddamn series. What's more, while the two franchises are very different, I don't think a developer ends up making Soulsborne
hey, I bought
the
it
way
too.
it emerged and
we'll
evolved
get to experience that together at some
first
point.
Having Armored Core in their catalogue. People talk about Kingsfield as the spiritual predecessor to Souls, but I genuinely feel that Armored Core is getting pretty short shrift as far as that discussion goes. Sure, the barrier to entry is high relative to other more accessible fare, which combined with the amount of releases boasting changes that on the surface aren't immediately noticeable, is probably why critical reception was so lukewarm towards the series over the years. But if you can take the time to get past all that, there really is a bounty of riches to discover here. The individual games are so fun in their own distinct ways that have been really interesting to examine in such close proximity to one another, each taking that core, no pun intended, of super satisfying mech combat and altering to varying extents the level of weightiness
Armored Core is the only place to get a
installments.
mecha fix.
How forgiving getting to grips with said combat can be, ranging from
Okay, I'm a little ignorant here. Weren't there Gundam games too, or no?
Fairly to the complete polar opposite.
Probably try to get it once the new GPU comes in. You
customization system that really allows you to play in your own way, while constantly having to weigh up the many consequences of any choice made, both in menus and in the heat of battle, and setting all
games always seemed intimidating because there's so much decision making. Like there's so much intricacy to each build, so it feels overwhelming. Customization wasn't really there. Okay, so if you wanted to, okay, so then this does kind of scratch that classic FromSoft itch where, like I've said, the reason why I like Dark Souls 1 so much is because you can play kind of any way. I mean, I know Elden Ring is the same thing, but obviously there are metas, you know, like with any game, but you can customize and build the optimal build, if that makes sense. And that seems to be the case with Armored Core as far as I can tell. It's like you can figure out the perfect chemistry, the perfect structure for your core, their mech, I guess mech would be the word. Now we go big bonk. Yeah, right. It's so funny too, because there's like slander in the community over magic users versus strength users. Classic Souls people are like, no, big bonk. Everyone else is like, no, magic is easy. And it is. And anybody who uses magic is like, you know, looked down upon.
Well-realized world building
However,
I've
magic
seen
is
in
goated.
games since Dark Souls, and this sci-fi mech dystopia preceded Souls by over a decade. Let me put it this way, that cinematic trailer that I thought you couldn't gauge any real info from, it now has me
a little game called Oblivion. Is it made by anybody I might know?
More excited for Armored Core 6 than any other video game. I can't stop watching and rewatching it because not only does it look really, really cool, that's what Armored Core actually plays like. There's a very high chance that this is what 6 will actually look like. And further, well, indeed, future installments would take great strides to increase things like flow and mobility beyond the PS1 original. Everything I said about the upcoming Fires of Rubicon, I knew as soon as I started to seriously seamlessly make my way into 1997's Armored Core 1. So, from this newbie's limited perspective, let's talk about my own subjective journey towards loving Armored Core as much as I now do, starting with that original. There's a real feeling when you boot up those super early Armored Cores now that this is a series remarkably disinterested in being liked. 1997 was the time of manuals, not in-depth, in-game tutorialization.
That is something I found out as I played more and more games series on my channel, is that the older games expected you to read. It's so funny how that's changed. Like, tutorials are now built into games. Things are designed a bit more simply as well, generally speaking. There are exceptions. I feel like Elden Ring didn't have much of a manual. There were some clues. You could read stuff in the game, but they expected you to read it. But games like this, like Armored Core, I played it last night. I didn't know what I was doing. There was no controller mapping. I looked it up. I had to Google the manual. Microsoft Combat Flight Simulator had a whole pilot's manual. See, that's what I'm talking about. Respectfully, even back then, as a kid, I'm not reading all that. However, it was a lot of fun. Like, there is a certain nostalgic feeling that I used to get, or I still get, when, like, think about when you would get a new game from the store and you pull out the manual and you're just reading it the entire drive home. You're in the back seat. It's like 6 o'clock at night. You're going to be playing for like 4 hours at least until you got to go to bed. That was the best. That's why Mega Man X is goated. You learn everything within the first 2 levels without having to read. See, Nova, you get it. Like, that was just, it was better than drugs. You know, you're just like looking at the box art. You're like, wow, he can breathe fire and he can do this. He can do that. Wow, that was me with Spyro 2. Spyro 2 was one of those games that's like burned into my brain reading the manual.
The sentimental value we now attribute to those little booklets belies their very real function back in the day. If you didn't read them, there was likely a fair bit of guesswork ahead of you when you booted up that new game you just rented from Blockbuster or whatever. But Armored Core goes further than mere mechanical guesswork. There's a distance, a coldness built directly into the game's systems, its themes and tone, that the game strives to make clear for you immediately. There's no button layout for you to scroll through before your first encounter. Hell, there's no menu at all.
It also makes me feel better, because sometimes I'd play old games and I'd be like, I didn't see the controls, and people in the comments are like, actually, they were in the other menu. You just didn't look.
You get told to sit your Raven exam, whatever that is, and in an instant, you're under fire from multiple hostiles jumping around that will get the better of you incredibly quickly, only heightening the absurdity of trying to get to grips with the barrage of visual information on screen. The weapons, the ammo counts, the numbers versus the big green bar, the bizarre targeting
reticle, is crazy. There's
crucially,
no
how any of this translates to a control setup that initially reads as similarly dense and impenetrable. Forget boosting or flying around the arena to match your opponent's comparative agility and elegantly take them out. You are stuck trying to figure out how to look up and down the most basic of mechanics.
What would that even look like? Like, is it like a Transformers game? Do you just like spin up and just like your mech just goes and you just turn into Starscream or what?
Mechanical function, and you're left scratching your head under intense pressure to get a grip on it. It isn't just an issue of Armored Core being a pre-DualShock game either, existing before the standardization of right analog for camera controls. As we'll see, that feature didn't make it into these games for a long time to come. No, this control scheme, as initially awkward and insane as it seems, is, at least on some level, a key aesthetic choice, in line with the game's general vibe.
The controls feel very weird.
As that's
it's cool,
still
though.
Kind of what it is essentially, is way more about getting you on board with the kind of experience you're in for than it is about getting you up to speed with basic controls. Because even when you know that stuff, you have to realize that you're in for a bumpy ride here. Armored Core's world is one that flat out doesn't care about you, or anything else for that matter, outside of how much of a stranglehold one corporation has over this desolate, post-apocalyptic wasteland versus another corporation. You are but one of many similar cogs in that nihilistic machine, roughly prepped to be shoved into that ongoing meat grinder for seemingly very little purpose other than temporarily dodging the inevitability of ever-dwindling resources, I suppose. I know this this because, well, I didn't get to engage with Armored Core's key selling
I swear they had toys like this at Happy Meals back in the day, dude.
point. Its array of customization options for a surprisingly long time. The garage, the shop is all accessible from the moment you complete that initial test, but I was locked out of it. This is because after barely making it out of the tutorial and proceeding to fail the first couple of missions thanks to me being no more competent at controlling this hulking mech that felt as if it could barely turn around to meet the enemies and projectiles whizzing past and through me, I was instead just desperately fighting to clear the debt I'd accrued incredibly early on, an endeavour that my first time round ultimately proved futile. See,
do you get debt when you die? Are you punished like for just being bad immediately?
Outside of a few key missions, Armored Core doesn't end when you fail. Said sortie, selected from a menu, is but one event in this all-encompassing war between the corporations Chrome and Murakumo Millennium. You got hired to do a job, you failed, and that job is likely gone now. On the plus side, you didn't die, you can still go back to that job board, but you now have to contend with the fact that your machine isn't going to pay for itself. That job was an opportunity to make money, and instead, it's...
Do they take Klarna or like Afterpay or something?
Sent you into the red. In Armored Core, failure doesn't come cheap. The game allows you to sell parts to make money, but of course, missions still require a full functioning mech to enter a
What do you mean? I can't just be all legs?
Until you can crawl back out of the red, you're stuck with what you've got. The mission difficulty grows, battles feel decidedly harder fought, and yet your reward at the end of a mission that required such Herculean effort is offset by the increased costs of repairs and extra ammunition that you needed to expend to get just past that finishing line. And so, there you are, breathlessly awaiting your winnings, and through the medium of a cold, silent stat screen, you find that successfully completing the mission actually cost you money. By playing the game,
I can see why this series may not have taken off. This is for a very specific kind of and now I mean that like as in the first few games. This is for a very specific kind of person. Like, I thought Souls games were hard. This is crazy.
Are worsening your own debt spiral. And while you're so focused on just trying to get your head above water...
But I also respect FromSoft for being like, nah, figure it out. Deal with it. Here. They just kick you into the deep end of the pool.
For even a second, you maybe gloss over the fact that every job you take on, every sortie through pitch
welcome
black,
12-year-old, learn how much a loan is.
And
Yeah,
cities
right.
Seemingly
there it is. You just nailed it, Will. Why teach economics in school? Have kids play Armored Core. They'll learn the value of not going into debt immediately. If you can't beat Armored Core 1 in 1 week, you fail school. That's it. You start over. You go back to kindergarten. Doesn't matter your age. You're 16. Doesn't matter.
Void of humanity, often directly at cross purposes for competing corporate interests, with each party telling you, we're not the bad guy, it's the other guy doing the exact same thing as us that's the bad guy. You know, your jobs seem to exclusively involve eliminating laborers, expressing disdain for their abhorrent conditions at the hands of your paymasters. Said overlords stating pretty starkly that this could harm their public image, and so people need to die. But you don't care. A job's a job. What else is there to do here? What life is there but one enveloped by violence, by debt, by the need to just get by, to get through one more job, to stave off debt for one moment longer, despite the fact
they feed them to the children that can't
shake
eat them.
Only tightening the corporation's grip over you, over everyone. See, being broke, as it turns out, is pretty taxing. Fiscally, physically, spiritually. It often feels like there's no way out. And as we can see
there an Armored Core
real-life governments capitalizing on things like petrol and food.
I don't gamble because I played Sierra Hoyle Casino as a kid, and it let me take fake loans to gamble, and they got really mad. See, that was me, but in the Pokemon, or the Poke Center in Pokemon Ruby. And I think in Leaf Green they still had it, if I remember right. That's about when I stopped playing the series. But I remember going there and gambling like crazy. It was so funny.
Shortages, using a crackdown on strike action as a means of reducing everyone's human rights and increasing their control over populations. You know, times are tough and confusing, and we're the only ones that can steer you through it. Well, somehow, coincidentally, companies are able to make record profits off of human misery, and despite its heightened sci-fi setting, there's something that feels, if not completely true to life per se. I think we're at least a few weeks off of mech mercenary becoming a viable career path. Remarkably comprehensive immersive, dare I say relatable, about the dystopia at the core of...
I don't think mech mercenary is the thing. I don't think that's actually going to happen. I think real steel, like the movie, I think that's going to happen one day. Robot fighting, like there's battle bots, but I mean full mech warriors fighting in an arena. That would be the shit.
Armored Core.
They took out the game corner after Gen 4. That's what it was.
I realize we haven't even gotten into what is so legitimately great about Armored Core's gameplay yet. But even on my first attempt where I failed miserably, that atmosphere was so compelling, so carefully built and oppressively grim that it was hard not to be enthralled by it, especially when such a cohesive thematic structure was coming from this clunky old PS1 game that released before Metal Gear Solid. Seriously,
Another
while the
series
plot
I need to
itself
play.
here isn't super fleshed out, a trait that will continue throughout the series to varying extents, if Souls-like world building and disentangling lore from things like item descriptions is your thing, there seems to be
it's amazing
as
we start
rich
off
a
with an
tapestry being
oscilloscope.
spun
Pong
here
was
as
on an
the company's
oscilloscope,
future
and now we have
works.
Elden Ring.
But on that note, it's easy to say that, well,
Hey,
this is
Dark
the
Souls.
company that would go on to create the Souls series. What
Was it you who rang the bells of awakening?
did you expect? And I feel it's important to mention that the director of that series, Hidetaka Miyazaki, the one that usually gets
Damn.
all the credit
Good
for
pronunciation.
cultivating the
I would've butchered
similarly
that.
oppressive Soulsborne atmosphere, didn't join From Software until they were halfway through development on Last Raven, a PS2 installment that didn't release until
Also, if nobody's played the Demon's Souls remaster on PS5, it is iconic. It's very good.
2005, and he didn't direct any of the games until Armored Core 4. No one knows the inner workings of this studio that's remained even more shrouded in mystery than most, but if there was any influence to be had, it would have been Armored Core that shaped Miyazaki's approach to world building, not the other way around. And of course,
get back to it, but my
FromSoft has been
PS5
pretty
controller's really
liberal
bad
over the
stick drift.
years in transferring
Well, ask
items,
Santa
characters,
for a new controller.
nomenclature between different game series.
Even
but
though it's after
even beyond
Christmas,
the mention of the
you can make
Dark
exceptions.
Soul organization or the appearance of the Moonlight Blade, perhaps the
Oh,
most
nice.
prominent similarity I found between the two games was the way that Armored Core handles failure. See, while Armored Core might seem completely brutal and uncaring, it does want you to get through it. It's still seeking to be an enjoyable game, and so when you reach a certain level of debt, the game resets automatically, only now you get a boost to your combat capabilities, like constantly equipped radar, freeing up a
okay, so I just have to fail a lot, and then the game will just go skill issue, and then there you go.
space on your mech to equip more weaponry, or enhance booster performance
Santa like
so
the
your
claws,
mobility
yes.
increases. And every time you reach that level of debt and do the whole game over, these benefits stack until you basically become what I imagine would be an unstoppable killing machine, readily able to mow down whatever gets in your way. It's like the opposite of a new game plus mode. It's giving struggling
That's kinda
players
cool.
a boost
That's a cool
so
mechanic.
they can play more effectively. The thing is though, this whole system is framed in-game as the Human Plus project. A means by which the corporations render you unfit for purpose in this world, and so take you in regardless of your will, augmenting you with equipment that more effectively suits their purposes. They've taken a world already so devoid of humanity and managed to find a way to bleed that stone even drier. Sound familiar? It's hollowing from the Souls game.
Listen, Will, one cycle won't hurt, okay? One cycle. You suck, here's some mods. Yeah, right. That's what they said to Captain America. Like, everything good that came out of him was in a bottle, okay? Iron Man said it best. Iron Man built the mech.
It's becoming tarnished. It's the gradual erasure of your humanity. The thing that if you just beat enough bosses and get enough currency, you'll be able to claw back.
Such a fun
right?
fight.
That is, until you inevitably fail again and it slips out of reach.
If they don't put this boss, if they don't put him in Elden Ring Night Rain, I'm going to cry.
Once more. There's
He needs to,
arguably
or
a
at
great
least have
deal more
a skin,
nihilism
like an
inherent
armor
to the
pack.
first Armored Core, as you just fight and fight and fight through this awful world,
That
with
is
the
an
only
ugly
end in
spider.
sight being that you will likely lose your humanity at some point, compared to the relative absurdism of the Souls series, which to me more prominently asks questions of how one might find the beauty, the value of existing in a world as seemingly dead as the ones found in Souls games. But similar to those titles,
I
all
agree,
of
Nova.
these
I hope
themes
so
are
too.
tied directly to your gameplay. Every mechanic.
Actually, we're going to do a quick tangent. Just 1 second. Night Rain player count. I just want to see this for my own. Oh, nice. Yeah, 36K. We're good. I mean, there's peak, but 86K at 24 hours. That's great. Yeah, that's solid. This game's not going anywhere.
Every system shares
Buy it from
a
Marina.
narrative
Oh, hell
or
yeah, dude.
thematic
I'd love to get
purpose,
Marina in this.
while also just being
We can
really
carry her through
goddamn fun
Tricephalus and
at the same
beat Night
time.
Aspect
I
in a
myself
day.
ended up not going down the Human Plus route, manually restarting my save before the corpos got a hold of me, and on that second go-around, now equipped with some limited
Bro just admitted to save scumming.
knowledge of my way around this robot, as well as a couple of pointers from some beginner guides and a fantastic video by Josh Strife-Hayes, proved to be far more illuminating as to the game's very real mechanical charms. Yeah, it's
Nice.
clunky to
Okay,
begin
if
with.
she does,
the
that's great.
claw-like grip with which you sometimes find yourself holding the controller might seem mental, but
Yeah.
it is something that's possible to get used to. Feeling like the perfect representation of a corporation only interested in producing more cannon fodder, plonking you in a mech cockpit and saying, learn this or die. At the start, you're focused
That's
on
pretty
finding
hardcore.
any means of staying alive possible. You might not be able to run or turn very fast, and so it helps when your mission, which almost all consist of addictively bite-sized chunks of combat lasting from 1 to 5 minutes, takes place on a narrow bridge, giving you time to figure out at what distances enemies become a real threat to you, the points at which you can snipe them from afar,
you can
the
cheat.
dangers of being
Nice.
out in the open as opposed to hunkering down behind cover, positioning enemies in such a way that you can take advantage of friendly fire, using their
I miss that era of graphics. Look at that, man. You could make that in like an hour in Blender. That's so cool.
ammo to conserve yours, which, given that there's no health or ammo refills during missions, can make all the difference between a successful sortie and a failure. It's all knowledge that you can then take into the more open environments of certain sorties, using whatever tactics and cover you can muster. It's panicked, but it's delightfully tense. And then, one mission, instead of awarding
Having a
money,
greater range of
gifts
fire
me
isn't
a new
cheating.
set
It's
of
actual
legs.
military
Now that I'm
doctrine.
not
Tell that to the comments section. But I appreciate that. I appreciate the encouragement.
so catastrophically in debt, I decided
If anybody's ever fought Maneater Manus in Dark Souls 1 in the DLC, you understand the power of being able to see him through that little hole. Pause.
to finally engage with the customization options, and this is where I fully fall in love with Armored Core. The lightweight legs I'm provided suddenly opened the game up in a way I could never have envisioned. Previously, an enemy
Broken
flying
sprint.
behind me could leave me in a super precarious
See.
spot, because turning was a whole event in itself, taking several
There's
seconds
something really
for me
scary
to
about
translate
Doom Guy
what
and
it
the
was
word
I
goatsy
wanted
next to
to
each other.
achieve to this control scheme I wasn't used to, as well as the molasses-like speed at which the physical maneuver takes
Yeah.
place.
It
Now,
feels
I'm jetting
horrible.
around the battlefield, not literally, that comes later. I'm not cowering from
Intimidating,
enemies,
yeah.
I'm seeking them out. I've gotten the strafing controls down and can finally outrun some of these hostiles. My gun is slightly weak though, probably would be wise to invest in something slightly more powerful, and hey, these missiles I'm using are costing me a whole lot of money to actually use. So why don't I sell the launcher and use that
It's amazing
to pick
they
up
introduced
not only
they introduced actual children to the sense of an economy in a game. Like I didn't know anything about that sort of thing until CS:GO came out. Like that's when I started thinking of like, oh, this gun costs $5,000 or this gun costs $1,200. I should probably be smart. But this is like you're 8 years old and it's like, here, missiles cost $1 billion. Good luck.
a nicer
12 billion to Israel.
weapon with more ammunition, but a more effective generator. The things I really need to be looking out for here are keeping my mech's energy levels high enough to power all these new parts I want, so going with the top of the line generator suddenly makes a whole lot of sense, but also
Yeah,
that the
see, the thing about Ace Combat, though, is like with the planes, it was reasonable. It's like, okay, yeah, you want a better plane, you got to save up. That makes sense. Buying the weaponry, though, like, I mean, for example, the bullets are infinite. So, like, imagine paying for infinity bullets, you know?
legs can
So are the
physically
missiles, I guess,
support them
depending.
all too. I upgrade to quad legs as a result, which comes with the added benefit of being able to fire shoulder weapons without needing to stop in my
It is funny to think that an F-14 could hold 56 missiles.
tracks and aim. Enemy fire is constant, and so I'm still interested in staying nimble here. And because I can now sell every part on my mech to gain extra funds for new models, and there's no loss of value
Yeah,
if I
you're-
decide to
you're
sell
telling me,
something
Will.
back, there's
I'd have
no
been
real
broke. That
risk
video would
to
have been short.
trying out builds and weapons that I might have otherwise avoided. Hopefully you get my point here. Every single decision made in the shop and garage screen not only comes with its own series of considerations and consequences that need to be offset, that can fundamentally change how you play the game, but give you a more thorough understanding of your own mech, what you want out of it, the path you want to take, so the mech can help you
This is
fight
what Titanfall should have been.
Each upgrade
I mean, Titanfall 1 and 2 are
gradually
good,
away
but
from
like
the hunk of junk you started
FromSoft,
with,
you
and
have an
into
amazing
that
opportunity.
mindset where,
I'm just
above
saying.
all else, Armored Core is just a really video game.
Air combat,
Give it
solo
enough
planes, you
time
got
and
shot
you're
down in.
eventually hammering on buttons with a frequency and intensity that makes it look as if you were a character playing a
I don't
fake
remember
game
if they
in a
did.
movie. The action of
Because I
Armored
played
Core
it, like,
is as
2 months
weighty
ago.
as it is delightfully
I
frenetic.
don't remember. Did they?
Eventually seeing you meet even other ACs, units that have heightened abilities compared to their grunt counterparts. In glorious anime-style combat,
Damn, that looks
staring
sick.
each other in the face as you boost strafe along endless desert plains, desperately trying to hold onto that lock. More powerful weapons shrinking the trademark square aiming reticle, and more agile enemies requiring you to keep an eye on the boost meter
See, we should just give people in wheelchairs miniguns, because that's what they would look like, this tank right here.
used to keep up with them, ensuring you don't spend it all and have to endure that agonizing wait for it to fill all the way back up. The charm of Armored Core lies in all these micro decisions you're having to make at every turn under intense pressure. Pressure that sometimes can get the best of you, even when you think you've got a specific technique nailed down. There's just so much to keep an eye on at any given time, and training yourself to become more efficient in that process, becoming more familiar with the workings of your
I saw someone try to play it recently and they got an actual game over screen. That's funny. That's very funny. Because I don't remember that happening with mine when I started, when I had the starting plane. I bombed in the first like 2 missions, I think, and then I just restarted and got further, obviously. But I don't remember losing my plane. If that's the case, though, that is very funny. Maybe that's something I just didn't notice. I do remember taking the A-10 Warthog and absolutely eating shit, though, trying to go high altitude, and it just stalls and just zoop. There's something irrationally cool about mechs. I don't know what it is.
mech
Big
is
power.
downright thrilling.
Mechs are train autism. They're a cousin of train autism. That's what it is. They're just bigger trains with faces.
And just like the worry of becoming destitute hastens your willingness to dehumanize the conflicts you wade into with squatters and unions and the like, so too does your ever-growing combat ability. Armored Core is so fun, it makes upgrading your mech such a well-earned and personal endeavor that for me, I couldn't wait to get back
could
into
cure
the
some
action
people's
once
depression.
more. The morality and ethics of fighting for all of these different factions be damned. In playing this game, you become a killing machine. Everything is connected here, and it bears repeating. This is a PS1 game released in 1997. You know, despite it being my first console with some immensely cherished memories attached to it as a result, I rarely find myself going back to that platform, instead opting mainly for the heightened fidelity and fluidity of PS2 games. Armored Core is proving to be the exception to that preference. In every regard, from gameplay to storytelling, I have been shocked at how well this holds up. It isn't perfect, of course. The fact that you're maneuvering the camera as if by crank isn't helped by the many times it'll get stuck on geometry, and the lock-on often sees you awkwardly fidget around as you look directly at the thing
I can see
you're
why these
trying.
other games didn't do too well at first, because if it's getting like camera glitches are a great way for me to be like, I'm good. I'm not doing that. Like, if a game is hard as hell, like if it's just naturally built to be difficult, I get that. That's acceptable. But if it's glitchy and broken, I understand developers aren't perfect, but even so, it's like, okay, you know, there's a limit. That's how I play BF6. AD spam left click. Yeah, that's a good way to play when you're in a hallway.
To destroy because
Any
the
Metro
game has
map players?
decided some other thing vaguely in the reticule takes priority. There are some moments where that awkwardness becomes harder to justify as being part of the experience of navigating this complex piece of industrial machinery. But even with all that detritus, compared to so many of its PS1 contemporaries, it still feels so modern. Look, despite a final level that really puts a damper on what preceded it, going from uniquely intense action game to an utterly absolutely excruciating platformer, its control setup was not built for, taking the camera from the occasionally awkward territory it previously inhabited to an absolutely unbearable nightmare. After beating the game, I've been going back to that cinematic trailer for Fires of Rubicon pretty constantly. It's a thrilling trailer on its own for sure, but where I initially viewed it as hard to glean any real information from, given its cinematic nature, I now look at it and become even more excited, thinking this is what the game will play like. Even from that first title released over 25 years ago, its action is so surprisingly flexible and intense that I can already perform some of the moves seen in the...
What is that? Steel Lancer International Arena, or Arena International? What is this? Experiencing interruptions? No. Maybe. Damn. Oh, this looks almost the same. Bro, why is our YouTube homepage the same, Rex? Because we're the same level of weird. Dude, this would have been the shit when I was like 10. Listen to the music too. Very 2000s. This music in this game was shit. The music in this game was shit. This had a core memory. Yeah. It's very Tony Hawk-esque. I don't know, man. This is great. Feels like it's summer 2001. Now that's what I call music, 2001. It looks like it's a little bit easier to navigate. Alright, that's enough yelling. Very cool, though.
Trailer for a game that hasn't been released yet. Seriously, I can't overstate this enough. Armored Core might have its quirks,
MX versus ATV was the shit,
but it's good enough on its own that you can just play it as a big fun mech game. As far as that type of game goes, this is still cream of the crop stuff. But it's the way all of this is contextualized against this wider world built by From Software that elevates Armored Core to the level of a title that transcends its place as a historical touchstone. This isn't the kind of game where you appreciate its cultural value to get to the next, more polished installment. If you're thinking about getting into the series, I would say play the original Armored Core, especially as we're about to see that this isn't a game that necessarily gets better with just a new coat of paint, and that it represents such a delicate balance of systems and mechanics that taking this formula to a new generation becomes a lot more complicated than you might think. When you envision generational jumps within the same franchise, I think it's safe to assume that there's going to be some kind of cleanup, both technical and mechanical. You know, the first game got them out the gate, and now they have the chance to really refine the ideas they must have been going for in the last title, but were possibly held back by, I don't know, platform or technological limitations.
That goes so hard.
Then, when you boot up Armored Core 2, released 3 years later as part of the PS2's launch lineup, and find that it's...
I love when menus looked like that.
Released 3
something about this like techie look from the 90s and 2000s.
Years later as part of the PS2's launch
what if they have any mech games in VR? That sounds Disney.
It's basically just Armored Core 1 with a slightly new coat of paint. And when I say new coat of paint, I mean the environments are still drab, deliberately so.
Back
Maybe
with the
some are slightly bigger, more labyrinthine in nature,
like
but
another
the
hit when I was a
menus
kid.
no longer
That
look
music
as if you've just opened
memory.
up a rudimentary PowerPoint filled with
What'd you get for
word art.
DoorDash?
It's got that kind of Metal Gear Solid 2-esque hexagonal future grind to it. Everything is bold, bright.
That's me, the core memory thing. That's me with Guerrilla Radio by Rage Against the Machine. Every time I hear that, that was the first time I ever heard them was in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. So like when I hear that song, it's like that scene in Ratatouille when he bites the food and just kind of gets sucked back to when he was a kid. Pause.
Flowing, exciting, right up until the point you're back in that action and you find that, well, war is still hell. This expansion of the themes I outlined in Armored Core 1 is definitely one of the more impressive points of the sequel. Bear in mind, it's at this stage I realised that actually trying to connect all the dots here to get the complete picture of the actual plot is neither something I'm going to be able to effectively do, nor would I particularly want to. You know, I think Elden Ring marked my limit as far as FromSoft's lore-based storytelling goes.
Oh,
but in this instance especially,
there's a place out
that
here.
Confusion as to what's going on, that fatigue might
called
be
Godfathers,
kind of the point.
or no.
Bear with me here.
Yeah, I think
Your
it's
actions
Godfathers
at the end of 1 didn't change anything for the better.
Really good.
If anything, the problems only intensified. Even trying to escape a barren Earth to find a future elsewhere, namely Mars, the wrath of corporate greed cannot be escaped. Mercenaries are still required to kill people in exactly the same way they did on Earth, for pointless furthering of moneyed interests, just with more competing factions to take into account.
Never would have thought.
Or not. Your purpose is still just to get paid. Taking out antagonist Leos Klein, the head honcho of...
Interesting build. How do I get this large bottom end with tiny torso? How do I do that?
The Frighteners, the mercenaries being hired by Corporation Zeo Matrix to overthrow what government still remains in this hellscape. It's just another job, maybe with a slightly higher degree of urgency. There's a lot more talk of your piloting ability this time around. And in a world so otherwise desolate and cold, it can be quite nice to hear something like that, especially when you've trained yourself to become better, working with this rather unique control scheme. Which makes it all the more gut-wrenching when the fellow AC pilots you're receiving compliments from suddenly turn on you. Your ability, your humanity, is a threat in this world. You are not a friend, you're not a person, you're competition. It all represents a really admirable dedication to maintaining and meaningfully expanding on that atmosphere that so elevated its predecessor beyond its already amazing mech combat. But other than a slightly more ambitious narrative scope, I suppose, Armored Core 2's design is still remarkably similar to the first game. Hell, some missions are straight up lifted wholesale. You still start with a Raven test, whose corridor crawl this time around is slightly more forgiving than its predecessor's wide open arena, but is equally as dispassionate.
Look at the graphical jump. Hang on, look at that.
More forgiving than its predecessor's wide open.
I didn't even notice that. Look at this. This looks like a mobile game from like 11 years ago.
An arena, but
and this is like polished. This looks really nice.
Equally as dispassionate.
It is insane the jumps that we made in the 90s and 2000s. Like if you look at games throughout the series, like I mean Ace Combat 1 versus 2, 2 versus 4, 4 to 6, like it all, the jump is ridiculous.
Of objectives, and just as keen to avoid explaining absolutely anything to you about how this thing is meant to control. Graphically, things look like the developers probably envisioned them looking first time around. But control-wise, I remapped the same buttons I did previously to play more or less the same game I played previously. And you might think, isn't that enough? You loved the first game, so isn't this just more of a good thing? Well, yes and no. Don't get me wrong here, I still enjoyed my time with 2 a great deal, but if you were to ask me which game in the series I'd want to return to, the second would probably be at the bottom of my list, honestly.
Wow.
The problem isn't with the control scheme, to be clear. That initial clunkiness and finding your own ways of overcoming that is a key aspect of Armored Core's identity. The problem is that with the few updates 2 does bring to the table, it illustrates that even small changes to this framework can completely alter the balance of things, introducing an awkwardness all its own. The introduction of extra sections of your AC to consider upgrading, the inside weapon, the radiator, etc., combined with the sheer
Damn, that's a lot of words. Too bad I'm not reading them.
Volume of new parts relative to the first game that are just immediately available to you should, in theory, heighten the flexibility afforded in just how deeply you can customize your mech. But in reality, in my case anyway, only serve to increase the systemic fires you need to be putting out at any given...
You came in the Armored Core?
in time during a mission, with seemingly little in the way of actual benefit. This kind of messing with the dials, so to speak, increasing or reducing the importance of certain aspects of customization is a design consideration that will be honed and evolve as the series progresses. But as far as 2 goes, what resulted for me was a kind of crippling frustration that left the play experience feeling more hollow, forgettable than the first game. Those missions lifted from 1, offering a direct comparison of just how much more I enjoyed playing that original than this identity crisis of a sequel. The increased fidelity arguably leaving things like switches and destructible objectives less distinguishable in world, making me wonder if this was actually the button or switch I needed to interact with, sometimes wasting precious bullets in the process. Weirdly, it's much harder to precisely aim your blade at something on the wall here.
Any interactive stuff, you're gonna lose money on.
The third mission saw minion level foes stun lock me in a way that I don't ever recall happening in the first game. Armored Core was clunky, but this felt like a whole other level. And now you're telling me that I'm overheating as well, reducing my output and health? God, I just need to find something, any combination of parts that work, quick. And so with that mindset, in amongst all these options, I upgraded my legs to something more nimble, then to a quad. I bought a new rifle, all near...
I can see the appeal. I can understand it. It sounds brutal, you know, it's hardcore, obviously, but like earning each upgrade feels like an accomplishment. I can see why people would get addicted to this and why it's got such a, I don't know any other word to describe it, but it feels like it has a cult following. Obviously, it's a large series. They have sold millions of copies of these games, but it feels like this is like an ignored, overshadowed franchise that a lot of people don't talk about. And then when you do get someone to talk about it, their eyes light up, like their eyebrows go all high, you know, across their forehead. They're like, oh, let me tell you about Armored Core. Like they start geeking out, and I can see why.
The start of the game.
I get it. It's a puzzle, and then when you beat the puzzle, it's like
3/4 of Armored Core 2's runtime. It worked, and I simply didn't have the energy to mess with that.
What's
to
that planet?
laboriously search this complicated store, looking for the most marginal of upgrades.
No,
but remember, I still had to consider in the grander context of how much more costly increased ammo capacity would be in the long run, for example. No, this build got me by, so I just went with it. That was up until one mission introduced multiple flying ACs that required slightly more mobility than my build was able to accommodate, which sure required a bit more time spent in the shop menu, but at that point I had so much money built up from mission upon mission with very little upgrades that picking out a new build that got me over that finish line was a rather trivial endeavor. Less my own machine whose gradual upgrades felt truly earned, heightening my attachment to my own creation, and more a disparate set of parts I had to be ready to ditch in an instant should a mission-specific obstacle require it. Such vast increases in the gear available, and the resultant uncertainty of just how noticeable an upgrade said gear would actually be to my current build, created a sense of option paralysis that just wasn't there in the first game, that led me to engage far less with this crucial aspect of the series. Like I say, there is an extent to which more Armored Core is inherently a good thing. I enjoyed my time with 2, but while side-by-side visual comparison might make it seem like an obvious choice in terms of a starting point for newcomers, you know, do you want the cumbersome PS1 original, or basically that same game with enhanced visuals and more customization options? But what that first game lacked in visual fidelity, it more than makes up for in focus and consistency, rendering 2 an interesting but clumsy first step to fleshing out the bones of this mechanical framework, rather than the generational leap forward that would render its predecessor obsolete. I mean, I have to say though, at the very least, 2's last mission wasn't quite as nightmarish as what came before, although it did require me to basically stay stuck in a corner, camera issues be damned, because it was the only way for me to effectively lock onto the big alien enemy that greets you once Klein goes down. I know, Armored Core is odd. If only there could be some meaningful refinement to the core action here that could significantly reduce situations like this, that could actually give us that leap forward.
Oh,
enter Armored Core
transition.
3. It was legitimately difficult to tell at first whether my proficiency with 3's early stages relative to the first two games was merely a result of suddenly having all this experience with those prior titles, or if it was actually representative of a more fluid set of mechanics. Because visually, things are very similar to 2. Your near identical looking mech cruising through futuristic but empty, grim cities, barren deserts, endless industrial corridors and the like, with seemingly no humans in sight. Regardless of what it was, however, all I know is that, man, Armored Core 3 feels good to play right out of the gate. It really doesn't seem like there's the same kind of adjustment period as players have to endure in the previous titles. Zooming around the battlefield.
So it sounds like they eventually figured out that, like, they should soften the blow a little bit at first. I hope it gets harder as you progress, but pause.
My boosters to handily dodge missiles while hitting enemies with a barrage of rifle fire of my own, rifle fire I should add, that seems to take these enemies down in slightly less hits than before. My boosters seem to be able to keep me going for slightly longer before getting in close enough that I can finish off whatever stragglers remain with a single elegant swipe of my laser blade. Just like in the trailer for 6. And I guess that's the word for it.
Damn, that goes hard.
There's an elegance to the way that Armored Core 3 controls. It all just feels so natural. Every action a flowing extension of the last,
I'm glad they ironed
rather
that
than
out.
The rigid stop-start affair of having to cease firing because the enemy flew behind you, so you can slowly turn around, then once you're in position, aim your reticle, all while hoping the enemy hasn't cut you to ribbons in the process. Here, you might as well be ruler of the battlefield. There are points where it really does feel like you're orchestrating your own anime-style duels. It's also responsive
so you become Doom
and
guy,
flexible, while still retaining that weight and scale that lets you know how hard you're hitting. On every level, the action out of the box feels like the perfect refinement and balancing of systems, the true jump forward that 2 should have been. Further, the strategic options available to you have increased as well.
The difficulty as you go, you get more guns and build options.
And it requires a frankly odd combination of button presses that's difficult to remember and execute in the heat of battle. But should you run out of ammunition, you now have the option to shake off that dead weight, launching the weapon in question off of your mech for increased mobility.
That's cool.
Personally, I barely used the feature, but it was nice to know that it was there.
So basically, you're allowed to go gloves off like you're in hockey.
Trick in my arsenal, increasing the depth of mech mastery for those seeking it out. What's more, 3 is the first numbered entry in the series where consorts are introduced, where for certain missions, you get given the opportunity to take an AI-controlled partner into a sortie for a portion of the mission payout, ranging from grunts right up to full-blown AC.
I would probably do that a lot.
It's not a game changer by any means. The AI in question seems to be pretty lackluster, in some cases only managing to swoop in a minute after the nick of time, after I've gone in and cleared it out myself. It seems that enemies and allies alike have a real problem dealing with doors generally in these games. In other cases though, they can sometimes actively get in the way. Remember, friendly fire is a thing in these games, and on some occasions saw a mere accidental shot turn my ally into an enemy I subsequently had to manage, to deal with on top of my actual objective. But hey, at the very least, if you anticipate that things are going to get hairy in a mission, you can nominate a person to come in with you and draw fire from the enemies as bait. I wonder if the game has been conditioning me to view other human beings piloting these things with the same kind of disposability the in-game corporations view me, who could possibly say? But beyond that, this heightened flexibility afforded to how I approach the in-game action extends to the customization. When I know things can be this responsive, can feel this good, suddenly I'm a whole lot more incentivized to take my time experimenting with different loadouts, rather than just being irritated to the point of simply finding what works and sticking with it. And it's a good thing as well, because while 3 starts out comparatively breezy, the difficulty spike seen in its last third or so is one of the more intense across the entire series, using the same kinds of shock twists where an ally will turn on you mid-mission, except they'll chuck in an extra AC to manage simultaneously, after your resources and health have been drained by grunt enemies swarming the arena. There was a while there where I wondered if
Classic FromSoft runback situation, when you have to run back to a boss like, you know, Ornstein and Smo or whatever, you're getting your ass kicked on the way, so then all of your Estus is gone by the time you get to the fight.
I was going to be able to beat 3 as
Very
a result.
cool.
It was a game I had to put down and come back to once I'd beaten the rest. But that's just it. It's a game I kept thinking about. I wanted to come back and exist some more in this mechanical
Just don't get hit? Oh, okay.
Figure out my own way through these challenges.
Sorry.
Because, well, as I say,
sorry for playing the same
these
game as
games
you.
don't do a whole lot for me. 3 represents such a sweet spot between the heft and agility of its action and the manageability of its customization systems that it seems like the game is finally providing the tools of self-expression necessary that I get to craft my own narratives during gameplay. The atmosphere still very much grounds it as a grim post-apocalyptic affair. As I say, it still seems as if the game is asking questions about the morality
during
of
the run
this
back to the
action
boss.
feeling
Yeah, I
this
mean,
good, of using tactics
I've tried that.
might
We
put
did
others
pretty
at
good in
risk,
Dark Souls,
etc.
though.
But
We've
3
been doing pretty
separates
alright.
itself from its
We've had our
predecessors
moments.
as the kind of experience you could excitedly chat about with your pals about the various hijinks that got you and you alone through any given mission. It still has the patented Armored Core clunk. There's still issues with camera and lock-on. It's not suddenly running at Ninja
That'll
Gaiden
probably
speed
get on my
or
nerves,
anything like
but
that. You
it's
are
part of the
still
experience.
required to really feel out and learn
Locking
your
on through walls
preferred
is so
style
funny.
of mech piloting, but it feels like the
Yeah,
shifting
DS3
of
felt
certain
more
sliders
straightforward.
relating to how responsive the controls
DS2
are finally
sucked.
lets you look as cool as mech combat probably should. It's not all perfect, however. There are some systemic changes made to 3, namely to do with currency and selling stuff that aren't quite as successful as the changes made to combat. And it's here we'll talk about some of the expansions that have released for Armored Core 3, which again, this is the experience of a relative newcomer, it's totally subjective, but while I still had a pretty great time with them generally, and the expansions to these games can often be fan favourites, in 3's case specifically, I can't say I'd pick them over the original game if I had the choice. For one, with 3 included, you can no
Look at the
longer
detail.
sell
That looks
everything.
sick,
Even
dude.
in the garage, you must have a core equipped at all times, which seems a bit arbitrary if I'm honest. You still can't enter a mission without, say, arms, legs, or a radiator, but at least in the main game, you can still sell those off to boost your credits before heading back into the store, taking you just over the edge to be
Interesting.
able to buy that new upgrade that you were just short of affording through mission rewards.
I like how
alone.
he's
It was a
floating.
great
Imagine you could do
system,
that in
and
the game. You
especially
just
seeing
a
as the
floating
core
torso.
is often one of the more expensive parts of your mech, the part that can have such a massive impact on different aspects of your mech's performance, its weight, its defense, the
Again, look at the
irritation
graphical
of
difference,
thinking,
dude.
God, why can't I just swap out my current part for this upgraded core? I'm going to be selling the old one back anyway, I don't need both, is an irritation that builds up quickly. 2003's Silent Line and 2004's Nexus, the 2 expansions I played, and once again, sorry if your particular favourite isn't featured here,
Hey, look at that. Somebody else playing in 4x3 widescreen. Finally.
take things even further.
Look how skinny his mech is.
The former, Silent Line, in its assumption that you've already played through the original game, expects you to
I got so
import
much
your
heat for
save
that.
from that game
Everyone's like,
with
"You're
all the
playing
parts and credits
16
you've
by
earned
9
from
squeezed
that
into
initial
4x3. It's
playthrough,
like, dog, I'm
rendering
sorry,
the already
okay?
pretty
It's an
paltry
accident.
mission rewards relative to 3 as pretty restrictive
You're
if
not
you're just
playing it the
starting
way I
out
want
here
you to.
and kind of useless if you're not. Nexus, on the other hand,
maybe my
strips
eyeballs are
away
skinny,
the
I don't know
ability to
which.
sell cores, arms, legs, your head, any part deemed essential to enter a mission, unless you've already bought a replacement and are ready to equip it. Here, it's countered by the comparatively massive mission rewards, even early on, representing up to 5 or 6 times what you'd get paid in one of the other games for the same job, but in doing so, Nexus scraps one of the most user-friendly features of the entire
You're supposed to play with your
customization.
child at home. CRT with Doritos nearby. What about Mountain Dew? Will, are you old enough to remember the brief period where we had Mountain Dew tall boys? We technically still do. We've got like the little like 16 ounces, but they had like 24, maybe 30 ounces that were like fucking huge. They were so nice. I used to slam one of those when I was at my grocery store job back in the day. That was enough to get me through the day. Now I'm over here like I need cold brew
and taking a
cocaine.
punt on something you've never tried
Not
before,
actually.
knowing you could sell
a
it
joke.
back for its original value.
I'm old, but I don't
should
remember
it
them.
not work for you.
Okay.
Further, Nexus alters
What was your
the
energy drink of choice as a kid? For me, for the brief period that I was here, Vault was just my shit. I was all about Vault. It was so good.
importance of managing energy output and the subsequent heat generated in a way that I imagine is supposed to reintroduce some more of that decision-making tension back into proceedings that 3's mechanical and systemic upgrades might have smoothed out. But in reality, the constant drawbacks introduced to what were meant to be part upgrades left me feeling as powerless as I did early on in 2, where here I really struggled to find a satisfying balance of mobility and controlled booster output that didn't absolutely cook my AC, rapidly draining its health to the point of being basically unusable. Now, none of this is to say that these games aren't fun in their own right, that there isn't any value to them. Far
like balancing an egg on a
Nexus
toothpick
is
kind
the
of
first
thing.
game in the series to
feature, because you got to have the AC, you got to have all the correct parts. You don't have the correct parts or the best armor, you're going to get obliterated. If you overheat, you suffer. That's interesting.
Dual stick controls, which we'll come on to more in a bit, but for now is an
dual stick
absolutely wild transition that does result in a greater immediacy of control, where there's not such a mental process of translating
energy drinks a kid?
to the controller
I would just have a
to
pop.
the resulting
So like
action.
Coke and
It's
Pepsi,
so much
but my
more
drinker was
intuitive
NOS.
and speedy.
Hell yeah. NOS is the shit, dude. NOS is awesome. Smells like urine, but it tastes so good.
The kind of sensation
that's
I
like my
imagine
number one.
the increased emphasis on temperature was introduced to
I don't know. I
counteract.
assumed
When it works,
I mean, I knew kids, when I was in middle school, that like just got money from their parents and they'd go to the gas station and get like a Monster, which is crazy to give like a 13-year-old, but whatever.
Inarguably, the best the combat has
I would
felt
just have a
up to
pop.
this point.
Oh, man.
It's just that to me, it
Midwestern
appears as
alert.
if FromSoft overcorrected somewhat. It goes to show that Nexus and its accompanying games serve as an interesting example of how, when it comes to the Armored Core formula, even the slightest of alterations to the way that one or two
seen people holding
features
the controllers
work,
backwards or
pushing
something?
one slider just slightly to the left or right, will have a knock-on effect on
Can't imagine
every
that.
single other aspect of the game's design. Despite the intimidatingly massive range of options available to players, it's all such a careful balancing act on FromSoft's part. I mean, there are many examples on a sortie-to-sortie basis
through late
of
nights
these
for
mechanical
papers. Hell
changes
yeah.
working in FromSoft's favor across the 3 games, creating some of the most varied mission design in the series up to this point. Changes as simple as reducing the level of light in a map, messing with your ability to lock onto enemies from the distance you normally do.
I liked the, there was a mission in Ace Combat 7. There was also, I think there was one in 5 like this, where basically your radar is like busted because there's a sandstorm or something like that. It might have been 5. But I thought it was really cool. It was you just kind of get occasional pings on the radar. Like you can't use your missiles. You have to use your guns. And at that point it becomes a skill check, which is really neat.
Shift the atmosphere
Blizzard.
of,
Yeah,
say,
thank you.
a regular forest attack to something altogether more tense and sinister,
Yep.
forcing you to
That's
intuit
the
your
one.
surroundings and gauge in an instant, amongst the dense foliage and fog, not only where an enemy is right now, but where they're heading.
How's that quote from Ninja go? My brother's wife just brought me a sandwich with a side of chips as I got a double kill in my lane in League of Legends. How's your day going? Replace that, but with smoothie.
Becomes Predator by way of 08th MS team. It's brilliant.
So
So you
good.
see, there's a whole lot of reasons then why if you ask someone their favorite AC game, they're probably going to point to 3. It just represents the point at which everything finally clicked into place for the series.
It does seem very
where things were
polished.
still
3
hefty,
seems like it's very
required some
smooth.
time and energy from the player to really learn and get the most out of it, but where the rough edges were sanded down just slightly to more readily reward players for that investment. The Armored Core identity remains intact, but more people get to experience it. It's a win-win. While I do genuinely think that 1 is a fantastic game in its own right, that's well worth checking out, if you want to see this version of the series at its absolute best, sans some of its harsher elements, 3 is the place to start. Notice though how I said this version of the series. That's because, after honing the formula down, FromSoft is about to take more than a slight detour with the franchise, and Armored Core is about to change pretty substantially. The move between 3 and 4 marks a transition for the series
I like the font of this menu screen. This looks like Dark Souls. That's
in
funny.
many ways. For
Or
one,
Demon
it's
Souls,
the
I
point
guess,
at
was
which
coming out, I think, a
suddenly
year later.
the process of emulating these games goes from simple plug-and-play exercises to requiring a fair bit more fiddling to ensure you can make it past the intro screen, let alone try to get the mechs to render properly, although thanks to updates in recent months and following said tweaking, the Armored Core 4 era games now run pretty much perfectly with sufficient efficient hardware. The 5 or V games, well, they're a different story we'll get onto in a bit. Moreover though, where the jump between 1 and 2 felt more like a paint job rather than anything truly substantial, the move to the PS3 and Xbox 360 is more than just a true technological step forward. It's a
also,
philosophical one for the series as well.
Looks like
and
a
it's
nightmare.
Interesting how you can kind of track where the series is at in this regard.
It's amazing how camera angles change
entry's
everything.
opening mission.
How are you supposed to defend against
where
this?
the series is at in this regard by looking at each entry's
He's like an F1 car.
Mission. One
what are you
was
supposed
an
to do?
unforgiving introduction to the
I agree. Game
desolate
preservation is very
brutality
important.
of this universe. 2 was similarly cold, but had someone watching over your back, albeit in a judgmental capacity. 3 teamed you up with a fellow bright-eyed, bushy-tailed initiate for your exam. But 4 marks the first numbered entry in which the game does away with the exam format entirely. Instead, you're in cyberspace, with the game getting you to repeat basic functions in a segmented, regimented way, separate from any kind of diegesis of ensuring that you pass the exam to make the team. It's still not a perfect tutorial. It doesn't explain everything. What it does explain, it does so textually, and given that Armored Core is, at its center, a kind of puzzle of trying to pull various things off at once, as efficiently as possible, breaking everything down so rigidly might not be as comprehensive in teaching players what to expect as it might seem.
At least a demo.
That said, holy moly, it's still an actual tutorial. Building on 3's heightened mobility out of the gate, it feels like there's much more of an effort here to ease potential players into the Armored Core experience this time around. And given that I actually played through this before going back to Nexus, the sequel to 3 where dual stick aiming was finally introduced as an option, there was something legitimately jarring. As jarring as when I was first plunked into 1's mess of controls, honestly, about jumping into a game that, well, controlled like an actual video game. I'd spent so long internalizing the old way of doing things that to go back to something more standardized constituted a learning process all of its own. But standardized, dare I say dumbed down? It indeed is. And don't get me wrong here, as we'll come on to, that's not a bad thing. But despite a presentation that in some areas suggests a level of sophistication, of complexity, of intricacy, hitherto unseen in the series, the mechanics of 4 do signify a remarkably different, altogether more arcadey experience than what came before.
It does look very
arcade. The difficulty
arcade.
curve of Armored Core games can be pretty all over the place at times. You'll be cruising along, gradually building a mech that you become extremely effective with. Once you've learned its ins and outs, then all of a sudden, bam! A mission whose volume and intensity of hostiles, whose nuances of its environment, forces you to rethink your entire build, that eventually you manage to struggle through before a seconds-long sortie that involves little more than moving from point A to B with shockingly little in the way of obstacles. It's uneven, but it does keep you on your toes.
How did you find 6 friends? 5 friends? How did you do that? You hate people. You know that.
Constantly aware of the fact that anything could go down and you will need to think on your feet and improvise, both during combat and in the menus. In 4, on the other hand, I can't really remember much of anything causing me any trouble at all, where the difficulty graph charting prior in-game games would resemble a failed lie detector test. In 4, it would be more of a flat line, no part of the combat system requiring much in the way of thought. The more forgiving gradation of weight limits here, replacing the strict binary found in prior
2,
games,
they know 3 others. Damn,
Tile yourself
build
with
the whole
enough
team.
weapons and ammo that you're not struggling mid-mission. Build up a stockpile of parts you can easily switch between in the garage, just in case a fast enemy requires slightly more consistent fire from a railgun rather than the more straight-ahead barrage of the grenade launcher.
You might be getting groomed in a good way. Might never see them again. Yeah, maybe.
Pick the boosters and generators with the highest blue numbers as opposed to red, because money is far less of an object here. Indeed, less important than the time spent in the shop or garage this time, fretting over every little part.
I mean, if you do, you know, remember where you came from.
Is getting to grips with the moment-to-moment maneuverability you're afforded during missions, as evidenced by the fact that
there was an era when PlayStation games seemed to all have this sort of dark look to them. Like the first couple games in this series, they were bright and colorful and all that. And then everybody had the water physics era. I think it was Super Mario Sunshine had some of the best water physics we ever saw. And then now there's this sort of like weird gray. And then a few years from now, I haven't looked ahead, but a few years from now, we're probably going to see, Mamma Mia, we're probably going to see what I call the piss aesthetic, the sepia filter, you know?
It's surprisingly
Everything's all
difficult to
yellow.
even find the shop this time around.
LAN party on
given
an
the game's
island?
introduction of schematics. In theory, a clever system to allow
me an
you
invite.
to store builds and access
Much
full
brown?
setups
Yes.
of enemies you've taken down, but in practice, just meant more steps to get to the menus I actually
I wanna
want.
say Metal Gear
Whether
Solid
you've
did
picked
it
a
best.
lightweight
Or no, not Metal
flight-based
Gear.
model or a tank, you're going to be dealing
Gears
with
of War.
a lot more enemies darting much faster around the screen, seemingly as if they're teleporting or glitching at first. A
That's
frenzied
insane.
pattern of movement that you are expected to
taking meth
match.
just to keep up.
Speed, how quickly you can pull off the action really is key here. Locks are far more generous, meaning that your goal when dealing with the Nixts, as they're called here, what were previously referred to as AC's fellow Ravens, is just to try and keep them on screen while pummeling them with as much firepower as you can hammer out. Health is higher, energy output more generous. The threat may still be high, things can still get hairy from time to time, but almost everything about the design of 4 is geared towards people being able to fly these mechs with greater ease. And again, don't get me wrong here, it's fun to go into a level and see everything just turn into this hail of weapon fire and blade swipes and swarms of missiles and explosions like some mad anime, but I also don't really
I know I should be commentating, but this video is just sucking in my focus.
remember a lot
boost
of
alone can
what I
cause
was
epilepsy?
actually
Lamau.
doing in 4 specifically. For one, my very real fear of the cutscenes crashing the emulator and costing
I
me
thought the
progress
video crashed
meant
for a
I
second.
wasn't really able to focus much on the pre-mission briefings. But in prior games, skipping said segments could very much drop you right in it when you suddenly had no idea what the objective was and what you were meant to do with it. For example, going through an entire level only to instinctually shoot the very thing they wanted you to bring back, costing you an entire mission. In 4's case,
I like that
though,
that's
there
an
was
option.
basically
I think
no
more games should do that. They should allow you to accidentally sabotage yourself.
situation where said confusion occurred, because the objective always seemed
That's
to be,
funny.
here are some
That's funny.
enemies,
You've done
shoot
that?
them. I did that for a few hours, beat the final boss first try, and then the game just ended. Maybe I had to shoot a structural beam or shoot something that chased me for a bit. At no point was there any doubt as to whether I had the ability or the build to pull that off. In terms of game feel, 4 can be a pretty great action game as far as action games go, but it very much is just one of them, where prior titles required at least slightly more thought as to how you were going to make
Target
said
acquired,
action
just gotta
play
shoot.
out.
Mission
Here, you
failed?
just
Yeah, that's
zap
what I'm
around
saying.
until the things
Why call it a
aren't
target?
there anymore. It's decent, but it's not exactly what I'd call thrilling, beyond its occasional visual flurries. What I assume represented an attempt to bring the franchise to a wider audience that I don't know proved all that successful, and I imagine had the potential to alienate a few longtime fans in the process. It's worth noting then that 4 was also the directorial debut, as it turns out, of the previously mentioned Hidetaka Miyazaki, the supposed king of making extremely difficult, deliberately abstruse games, making his
This boss pisses me off. I've played Dark Souls 3, I beat it twice. Still makes me mad. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was distracted by the front door opening. This boss is fun, but just a pain in the ass.
mark on the world of game direction with the least mechanically intense,
the Knight Rider needs to
arguably
parry.
most accessible version of a previously inscrutable franchise. That said, in
Nice
its
graphical
rather
glitch.
bland mush of ideas with which to shift the franchise to something more approachable and action-focused, there was a lot of potential to focus in on some key areas, which is where the spin-off sequel, For Answer, comes in. And oh boy, are we in for a treat now. Where 4 felt a little limp and lifeless in comparison to what came before, For Answer bakes this sterility
Damn, that's a
into its
big thing.
storytelling,
Whatever the
and
hell
the
that is.
results are as bleak as you'd expect
Imagine drunk driving that.
from a Miyazaki title. The dank sewers and pitch black underground cities may have lacked any direct human presence. Things look cleaner now, they're brighter, and yet somehow there's less humanity, more desolation to this whole scenario than there ever has been. It's an irony the game plays directly into. The new corporate sheen of the pre-mission presentations
That's
resemble
cool.
a 4 o'clock meeting
Very,
with
very Ace Combat 3-ish.
Jerry, read the month's projections far more than they do an outline of a military operation. There's something delightfully unsettling to have some business guy drone on about how this mission is totally a great opportunity for you to further your working relationship with this corporation. Go knock their socks off, champ. The ultra sleekness of the presentation,
definitely not a Boeing logo,
contrasting sharply with
or Lockheed Martin,
utterly barren wastelands that surround you, so abstract compared to what came before, so washed out, so unsettlingly smooth in that way that only the PS3 can effectively render, that the world is more alien than ever before, as if you were still trapped in the cyberspace of Force Tutorial. Battlegrounds on which you try to win the admiration of faceless corporations are the long-flooded remnants of lost cities like Shanghai, whose remaining buildings you barrel through with no heed paid to its past. It's all from so long ago that, reminiscent of Tokyo 3 found in Evangelion, its purpose has long since moved past residential comfort, as hinted at by the glorious intro, in which the gleam of White Glint's design, clashing wildly with the land it so casually soars over, so irreversible its desolation, its annihilation, you really have to wonder, why isn't anyone fighting anymore? What is it people actually want here? Of course, at the center of the conflict is control over what little supplies remain, for the survivors of whatever great cataclysm caused this desolation, now resigned to a life in floating sky fortresses. But the completely aseptic nature of the corporate dressing this conflict is draped in scream loudly the motivator is power. There's nothing else, just endless, lifeless oceans and deserts burying what once was. The washed out greys only serving to highlight just how thoroughly any sense of color, of vibrancy, of vitality has been sapped from the world like any other resource. It's all part of the visual palette introduced in 4, but here it feels so much more deliberate in its implementation, like it has a real purpose in terms of atmosphere and story. Because where prior titles had this set dressing, but it didn't really matter whether or not you picked up on its subtext, For Answer seems to really want you to think about the wider implications of what it is you're doing, where you're doing it, who you're serving, and who you're hurting.
So we finally get more of a story integration by this point. This was like, what, 7 games in? Something like that?
With the answer to that last one in particular revealing itself on a deep structural level to be you're hurting yourself. Most games in the franchise don't really conceive of you as anything. You are not a character, you're not moving your own plot forward per se. You are just picking jobs off a board and doing them until there aren't any jobs to pick anymore. People occasionally talk about your ability, they'll tell you to stop doing the jobs you're doing. The games might talk a bit about the legendary Raven that rose through the ranks, but the job is the job. It's getting done. For Answer, on the other hand, and as suggested by its title, asks you pretty directly if that is the only answer, the only outcome. And it does so by telling you, after the credits have rolled, to simply do it all again. I mean, it's not as if anything has really materially changed in that first ending. Might as well keep fighting and see if there's another way, right? More so than ever, the ACs you've been fighting have been trying to get you to consider said alternate path. So here's
it's so cool to see destructible environments on something from the PS3 era.
Opportunity to go down it. This isn't the first time Armored Core has required multiple playthroughs to get the full story, or given you an ending based on your corporate allegiance. But For Answer is definitely the title where such a structure was fully fleshed out, where said playthrough paths felt anything other than arbitrary. As a result, it's possibly the first time I've actually somewhat cared about the moment-to-moment plot in one of these games, because it actually comes down to your choices. You get to see firsthand how destructive and pointless siding with the League of Corporations is, and then you get to choose missions that explore the other side of that conflict. To see,
I want to say they started doing that in Ace Combat 4? They started doing that? Was it it was the Japanese well, the one where they had the Japanese exclusive that was like horribly nerfed compared to the North American version. I want to say that was 4.
Fits you better. The end results may be the same.
Because they allowed you to side with a specific
with
squadron.
The game going to great lengths to highlight just how grim things get when you side with the next over the League, but at least it's something. I get to claim some small agency over the situation. It's framed really well, with the missions starting to trickle in from Line Arc being presented
was it
very
it was either 3 or 4.
Other
yeah, you know what, you're right. It was Electrosphere. I remember now, because the the anime style video calls I talked about. Sorry, my own memory is fuzzy on my own video. Yes, because that's the one where they implemented basically picking one of 4. It wasn't squadrons. I forget what it was called. But you could side with them,
to pay you what
and
they
your
can
decisions actually
you're still a
changed the
mercenary
outcome of the
at the
battle.
end of the
I
day,
saw that
but
in
you finally get
5
the chance
as well,
to
I
be
want to
an
say.
active participant
When chasing after
in
the
the
Gleipnir.
fight against the corporations that have kept you locked in such endless conflict for multiple games now. And let me say this, my second playthrough of For Answer, I realized too late that I had accidentally picked the wrong mission and locked myself out of that second ending. A good couple of hours of progress wasted. Normally that would be the thing that got me to say, I'm putting this game down now. In For Answer's case, however, I had absolutely zero problem going back and replaying the campaign
5 and
again.
6.
Because, man, this game is so great. The more frenetic, action-focused control setup and moveset is carried over from 4.
I thought it was funny how people, not a lot, but a few people nitpicked in the comments. They're like, why'd you play the full Japanese version of Electrosphere versus the American conversion, like the modded conversion of it? I'm like, well, is that authentic though? Like, I wanted, I don't speak Japanese, but I'm like, the experience is the same. I just don't understand every word they're saying.
It's all been tightened up so that the button layout is even more
people watch anime without
to
subs.
zooming around the more open battlefields. But crucially, where 4 felt like such a flat line in terms of actual mission design, For Answer marks a return to the sorties of old, where you really had no idea what to expect, just at a scale that, like so many things about For Answer, has never been seen in the Armored Core games up to this point. Even when you're tasked with just destroying enemies, there are usually more of the radar tricks found in a game like 3 that serve to bring more tension to previously explored scenarios and environments. But the real star of the show here are the absolutely gigantic fortresses you're tasked with bringing down to size, often requiring a good deal of
I wonder what something like that costs to build.
strategy as to where you'd even begin with something this huge.
Getting the American version of the restored Japanese version is hard. I have no idea where I would get it. So I can't advise this, but obviously getting the Japanese ROM, and then you would actually, I did find it. It's like I think it's just an integrated mod or a conversion file, something like that. You just have to download a tool that converts it. I did this with a Monster Hunter video. There was a Monster Hunter, I think it was 3 or 4, that was Japanese exclusive. And somebody did the full English conversion. That I did because Monster Hunter's like super in depth in terms of reading. Like you actually have to be able to read everything. Ace Combat, it's like pick plane, pick gun, go. Plus, if you've already played the American version, you understand the plot. You see where things are going.
You'd even approach it.
And
Encounters
you can tell,
that can absolutely
when enemies are
decimate
coming
your
in.
health if you're not constantly moving, internalizing the rhythm of countless salvos from various types of weaponry bursting from these industrial behemoths in a way that's honestly not that far off the kind of approach you'd have to take with certain bosses from the director's future endeavors. Suddenly, things are not only mechanically engaging, they're tough again. They require thought and careful analysis of the enemy and your surroundings on the fly, just like the best moments of the older titles. And side note, it's very funny to me as a Scottish person to hear people freak out about the dominance of Motherwill, talk about how Motherwill has to be stopped, task you with destroying Motherwill, rejoice as Motherwill crumbles to the ground. I can assure you it's a joy most people here would probably share. Hell, the central combat is so satisfying that while the tactics rarely share. Hell, the central combat is so
That's me walking into my mom's bedroom when I was a kid, about to tell her that I threw up in the bed.
satisfying that while the tactics rarely change much, For Answer was the first game in which I felt compelled to blast my way to the top of the leaderboard rankings. The schematic system making so much more sense, thanks to the story missions more effectively building up the personality of the characters and the mechs they control. Multiple missions saw me come up against a particularly tough foe, using techniques that my projectile-focused build simply wouldn't be able to achieve, making me all the more curious to explore how these foes were able to pull this stuff off. And with their unlocked schematic, combined with the same abundance of currency found in 4, allowing me to conveniently purchase everything required and get to testing things out in an
I just want to know if it was my turn on the Xbox
for and tuning your mech upgrades in For Answer feels less like the desperate, cumbersome struggle to get past just one more encounter found in earlier titles, and more like entering a showroom in Gran Turismo. All it's missing is the smooth jazz, perhaps mirroring the glossier, more coldly business-like framing of the corporate war hanging over it all. Such mechanical, systemic world building and storytelling is still going on, and what's more, it's as effective as it's ever been. That said, while For Answer is fantastic, it's one of the best straight-up action games I've played, I don't know that I'd call it the best Armored Core. It's the best version of this version of Armored Core, but it's also not really what comes to mind when I think of this series.
Like, it's just a good all-around
I choose to play 3 and
experience.
4 Answer for completely different reasons to one another. The heft of things has been dramatically reduced, for very good reasons in 4 Answer's case, but that weight is Armored Core for me. And I
Never
think
the video game
with
interaction with my
Miyazaki
stepdad, it was
leaving
the
franchise
sit in here
for
and
more
watch TV with a
soulsy
popsicle while I
pastures,
talk to your
perhaps
mom.
the director that replaced him, Naoyuki Takahashi, saw that too, because the actual
like there were 2
numbered sequel
popsicles in
that
that
follows
house.
4 is about to go in its own direction, in some ways creating the highest potential return to the series' roots I could possibly imagine, and in most other ways completely shooting itself in the foot. So remember at the very start of this piece how I mentioned that I played through almost all of the numbered Armored Core entries and that it was complicated? Well, 5, or V, is that complication. Where 4 and 4 Answer ended up running pretty flawlessly after some messing with the settings, these games, including the spin-off sequel Verdict Day, were a case of RPCS 3 hanging on for dear life. From what other people have been saying, it's a wonder I got as far as I did, as most people seem to suffer crashes immediately after the first mission, if they can get to that point. Whatever the case though, especially during its more chaotic moments, my time with 5 could be described as less playing and more observing. Given that for some reason my PS3 died on me, and used copies of the games can seemingly creep alarmingly close to the cost of a whole replacement console nowadays,
these games,
that simply wasn't
they're
a
all
price I was
collectors.
willing to pay to check out a game that, even if I did get it running flawlessly on original hardware, is already a shell of its former self. See, 5 released in 2012, a time in which online multiplayer on consoles was arguably in its heyday, with numerous action games releasing, trying to capitalize on that then unbelievably lucrative market. Armored Core, whose previous attempts at multiplayer amounted to a bunch of PvP mech battle modes, decided it was going to get in on the online action, and so shifted its focus away from the single-player campaigns of old in favour of a PvE team-based approach to missions. For sure, a novel idea, and given that the servers were shut down almost exactly 2 years after the Western release, one that proved unsuccessful. The single-player component that remains then, in both V and Verdict Day, if not completely gutted, I mean there are several missions available for solo players to choose from, still feels like you're playing a different game to the one they intended, the one they wanted you to play. A comparatively incomplete experience. One
I love a
whose
12
design
FPS
was
experience.
intended for multiple people to tackle as an ongoing online experience, and therefore where single player feels somewhat incompatible. But the thing is, getting my hands on it for a bit at least, and reading a few reviews from the time, it doesn't seem like the reason 5 got shut down so soon, why the player base dwindled, was because of the game's ambition. No, it would appear that region-specific server issues and the series' still very prevalent issues with tutorialization presenting a steep barrier to entry for groups had more to do with how things went down. Because honestly, for every misstep, it seems like there's at least the seed of a really interesting idea. 4 and 4 Answer represented what was probably a necessary shift in the series' trajectory in terms of increased speed and emphasis on mobility. At least an attempt to lean into the action side of things a bit more, to increase the wider appeal of the series. V and Verdict Day, on the other hand,
it's funny how so many game series do that. They start off kind of figuring themselves out, right? Ace Combat was like that, kind of clunky but good. Air Combat. This series as well. And over time, they're like, okay, we've perfected it for the core audience. Let's see if we can broaden it a little bit. And a lot of times, I've noticed, they kind of fall on their face. They just kind of go too wide and overcompensate and shoot themselves in the foot.
And seem like they're trying to take just a few steps
like when a game is made for everyone, it's basically a game for no one. You know what I mean?
Back towards something resembling the older, more tactical style.
It's hard
of
to
play.
broaden.
Mechs are smaller, moving more quickly.
Which I think
along
is,
the
I mean, that's why a lot of people hate Skyrim over Oblivion. A lot of hardcore Elder Scrolls fans are like, Oblivion's the best. Even Morrowind is better. And Skyrim is kind of my only experience. I've played Oblivion for a few hours. It just wasn't my thing. Probably because I'm not a hardcore RPG fan. D&D 4E was the attempt to broaden it. How did that go? I'm not familiar, I'll be honest.
Than the early titles at least, but they are very much grounded. Of course, you can still jump around and over enemies and the like, but gone are the days when you're essentially flying with near infinite boosters across vast stretches of land in seconds. Things can still get incredibly fast and frantic, but we aren't talking 4 answer levels here. Things feel suitably heavy, matching up with the general vibe of the encounters you embark upon, reflecting the grim-dark aesthetics of similar action or war games of its time. Armored Core 5 leans into what I would consider the gritty PS3 aesthetic, where everything is brown and green.
Yep. That's what we were talking about earlier.
And kind of lifeless, but also simultaneously very, very shiny and blown out. It really reminds me of that Ace Combat game that released a year or so prior, Assault Horizon, where everything was close up and shaky and indeed gritty, everything looking like it's been kind of brushed with a layer of dirt in a manner entirely fitting with the style of media released in the early 2010s. Part of me thinks it's this visual style that led to the introduction of scan mode as an alternative to combat, the equivalent of detective vision in the Arkham games, where in environments as filled with overly shiny debris and weather effects and light bloom as 5 can be, it can become quite difficult to pick out these Michael Bay Transformer-esque hostiles in the map. In the gritty world,
the legend itself, Assault Horizon,
the PS3, forget intricate patterns, shininess is indeed the most effective camouflage. But jokes aside, I do think that scan mode serves a larger purpose.
That is such an excellent comparison too. Just what we were talking about, how broadening things too much can kill a series. And that's exactly what Assault Horizon was. They codified it. They attempted to turn it into COD. And it was horrendous.
Or at the very least, contributes to the kind of game Armored Core 5 is trying to be. The approach you're encouraged to take in the 5 games isn't quite as gung-ho as its predecessor. Its levels are more expansively maze-like. The streets are winding. The lead up to individual battles often requires a fair bit of trekking, often with long spaces between the action. These are environments designed for you to take your time, to really analyze your surroundings and plan your way through. Send in the recon drones available to you in order to gauge the number of enemies in any given area, then scan to see exactly where they are. Obviously, it's nigh impossible to be completely stealthy in these games, but the tall buildings feel like they're designed to be snaked around, trying to get the jump on your enemies.
It is really cool how well games did do with city design. With such
and
a limited
using
tech.
the winding streets and rubble.
Because Project Ace is taking their failures. Americans won't buy a Japanese-style non-COD like flight game. We got to make it about America. Amen, brother.
It's certainly in these moments where you feel the absence of multiplayer the most, where you imagine one player would have been able to take a commander role, assigning each player to take out a specific target to achieve the objective more efficiently in a multi-tiered plan of attack. But that said, there is certainly a charm to the more guerrilla-esque tactics encouraged by the level design, even when approached solo. It just obviously becomes much harder when you realize that all enemy fire is subsequently honed in on you, and you might begin to wish that there was at least someone else there to draw some of the attention away, even briefly.
Isn't that crazy? Their first one sold 2.2 million, I want to say. It was just over 2 million, which already, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. And then 6 million to do that 1996? I can't remember. 20, something like 30 years later almost. It's insane. But yeah, good for them. Well deserved too. 7 is a ton of fun.
Based on whether you take them on solo or as a team, but in my experience as the former, they certainly seem more difficult to pull off than in prior games. A large part of that, though, comes down to how much of a battle of attrition things often devolve into. The previous games were brilliant because no matter how difficult the task ahead of you was, you knew you were almost always planning for a short, sweet 2 to 5 minute excursion. It kept everything chugging along at a rapid clip. In an online game, however, constantly dropping in and out of mission select screens maybe isn't the best approach. I imagine you want to keep players engaged in-game as much as possible, and so missions are often substantially longer in 5, even in single player. You could have spent ages completing what would have constituted a whole, maybe even a couple of missions in its predecessors, ending up mentally exhausted after draining yourself of...
When missions go on forever, or when boss fights take like half an hour for just the boss, I'm like, okay.
ammo and
I get
health,
bored.
and still your mission
It
handler
decreased from
will
4,
call
5,
up
and 0.
telling
Yeah,
you that
that's-
they've updated
yeah,
your route
that was
to go
sad.
take on the next objective. Luckily,
One day we'll
5
get a Holy
introduces
Trinity remaster, huh?
workshops, allowing for one of the first times, I think, outside of a couple of mission-specific resupplies in 3, maybe 2, the chance to repair and resupply mid-mission. A potentially genius idea, but when I've just spent 20 minutes methodically clearing an entire city of enemies, and you then send me into an underground railway system to catch up with and take on a fast-moving train,
BF3
wiping
core.
my health with its numerous weapon emplacements, while also chasing after me with multiple, extremely capable ACs, you know, likelihood is I'm just terrible at the game and missing the point. I don't know. My play setup is hardly the optimal way to experience this thing, but to me it just doesn't seem like this was built for one person to take on. Even with the workshops, I just don't feel like I have the resources for this kind of task. And at the very least, give me a bit of time to process one thing before having me immediately follow the dotted line to the next major task. It is worth noting though that for as much as I'd heard beforehand about how Verdict Day doubled down on its predecessor's online focus, apparently gutting its single player component even further, I actually found the opposite to be true. Not only seeing a shift back to the more condensed, bespoke structure of sorties, now emphasizing the surprising snappiness of 5's action, but the addition of customizable, AI-controlled UNACs completely shift the tide of battle in your favor. The resulting tactics that open up to you might not be quite as malleable as if you were approaching these engagements with a human
Other
player,
mech
but
games,
they
Zone
do
of the
open up
Enders? Okay.
slightly, with the brunt of enemy fire being
I'll have to
divided
check that
between
out.
2 targets rather than just yourself. The AI in particular marks a dramatic step up from the consorts in 3, for example, and while they come with their own significant costs, it's wild just how many of 5's structural problems they end up solving, even if occasionally they
That's
do
good. We like to see a
trivialize certain
recovery.
encounters,
We like to see a
especially what
rebound.
were originally meant to be one-on-one bouts, and there were multiple occasions where I'd break down and simply wait, floating around as this little jetpack dude, until some point where the mission was arbitrarily completed for me. All that said, I actually had a pretty good time with Verdict Day when it worked. Armored Core games aren't known for their extremely lengthy campaigns anyway. I found that most can be beaten in around 5 hours or so. While Verdict Day might seem unbelievably short by the standards of its contemporaries, it's not exactly out of character with the rest of the series. 5 then is the
5
game
hours,
I
huh?
most
That's
wish
how long it's
I
gonna
could
take me
have
to get through the
experienced
tutorial.
back in the day, when I
Maybe.
could see
We'll see.
all this stuff functioning in the way it feels as if it was intended. Because honestly, even with all these foibles, it seems like there's a really fascinating game under the surface of 5. Some truly ambitious ideas at play, whose failure stems not from their individual lack of merit, but the structure of the release surrounding them. 5 being but one of many casualties of the aforementioned chase for online-focused acclaim that didn't materialize in a manner sufficient to maintain the servers holding it all up, coming at the expense of a complete single-player experience that would have sustained things beyond the point at which that online switch was flipped. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because it's not like you could easily get a hold of these games even if you wanted to. They're all on long obsolete consoles, never brought to new platforms, none available on PC. Indeed, the upcoming Fires of Rubicon will mark the first time PC players especially will have been able to
amazing
dip
this
their
game already
toes
came out
into
2
the
years
world
ago.
of Armored Core. I'd bet for most console players, the lack of preservation of basic availability of these games will mean that most will have absolutely no idea what they're actually getting into with 6. Is it any wonder then that we've been seeing so much questioning since that trailer dropped about how closely AC6 will resemble the Souls games, Elden Ring? As someone who has now played the games, I can see why that questioning might be seen as odd. You know, what do people actually mean by that? An open world, slow, weighty melee combat, big bosses, mechs but written by G.R.R. Martin and set in a fantasy world? But I don't know, I get it. FromSoft has seen such monumental success with this esoterically designed game. The audience has invested in that thing, and they were understandably expecting more of that thing, only to get presented with a relatively unknown quantity. A series arguably more esoteric, less accessible than Soulsborne or Elden Ring. People are just wondering if, in Fires of Rubicon, they'll find an experience that they can gracefully slip into, following dozens of hours in Elden Ring. Whether there's the potential to be as engrossing engrossed as that game left so many? Well, as far as I see it now, graceful isn't necessarily in Armored Core's vocabulary. This is a series you are meant to hammer away at, bit by bit. One whose design, hell, whose basic controls don't gel with the standards set by other games.
Yeah,
and
it's kind of unique in its own
bones
way.
about alienating
very,
those unwilling to meet the
I just want to be able to make a cool mech and
entries
story.
on their
Yeah.
own terms. From the moment you
Hopefully
start in
Fires of
this
Rubicon
series,
is like
if you
that
aren't
for you.
picking up what
Hopefully
Armored
that
Core
way
is
for me
putting
as well,
down,
'cause that'll be
it
my
will
first
grind
experience with
you
the
into
series.
the dirt. But if
Well,
you
sorry.
are willing to put
One
in
will
the
be my
effort,
first.
you will be
Rubicon,
rewarded
my
with
first
bounties
new
unseen in
experience,
other
whatever the word is.
titles. Some of the heftiest action out there, with an extremely high skill ceiling and customization options that more than most games really allow you to hone in on an individual style of play that works best for you. All of these mechanics and systems being backed up by, and themselves backing up, a truly fascinatingly constructed, mysterious world whose details aren't made readily apparent to you. A sense of intrigue that only deepens your connection to the intricacies and themes
Best of
you
luck
do
with that.
uncover
I'm not going
because
back.
you
Well,
did
thank
the
you.
work to uncover
And that's
it
why you're
yourself.
here.
And tell
You get to
me,
watch someone
listening to all
suffer
that,
going
doesn't
back.
it all sound a bit familiar? I don't think Armored Core 6 is going to be an open world or have super deep melee combat or anything
just
like
predictions.
that. Although who really knows on the latter? It's going to have missions, and you're going to spend a huge chunk of time in the shop and the garage.
You have a game
kitting out your
you're most
mech,
looking
rather than
forward to playing.
exploring
Legitimately, Fires of Rubicon. I know it sounds like such a basic answer, but this game that he's talking about now looks fantastic. Also, based on his review, 3 looks really good. Not looking forward to 1 or 2.
a massive
But 3 looks
dungeon or
good,
whatever.
4 looks
But
okay.
in terms of the mindsets these games
Definitely
expect
the
of
newest
you,
one. It
and
looks
I
really
should
cool.
reiterate,
It's got a lot
while
of
we
good
still
reviews,
know
a lot of
basically
sales.
nothing
It
about
might
the
be the
structure of Fires of
best-selling one, I don't
Rubicon at
remember.
this stage, I can imagine Soulsborne players would be, if not comfortable, quite satisfied with the process of getting to grips with an Armored Core game. I would also be surprised if this upcoming
3 is where
sequel,
most of
with
my
the
positive
years
memories
of
are.
experience
See, that's why I'm excited.
FromSoft now has experimenting
Cram.
with how to make their
C-RAM.
unique games more approachable, albeit with mixed
I
results,
think you mean
doesn't make some kind of effort to
And then just-
introduce more quality of life features, to more effectively onboard new players, to smooth that process out a bit so even newbies can get to the really good stuff more quickly. But if you ask me, after all this time over the last wee while spent playing all of these games, what I now want Fires of Rubicon to be, I'm not sure I could tell you with any degree of certainty. I think if I had to pick a favourite, it would
Music
be
to my
between
ears.
3
Yeah,
and
I
4
love the sound of
answer.
freedom,
But
brother.
I can't remember the last time I so thoroughly enjoyed myself digging into a series like this. There are legitimately aspects of every single game I played that I would love to make the jump over to this rebirth of the franchise. I just can't say enough good things about Armored Core. I've had a video plan brewing in my head for years, entitled Where Are All the Good Gundam Games? Because
Nice.
despite seeming like a series so ripe for adaptation, the dozens upon dozens of attempts we've gotten over the years have ranged from it's alright to unspeakably,
Some Rubicon spoiled by the
unplayably
video I was
bad,
watching to
with
figure
the
out if I wanted to
vast,
buy it.
vast
That sucks.
majority falling squarely into the latter
Sorry to hear that.
category. Well, turns out that I, at the very least, need to rethink that video, because the answer is obvious. It's Armored Core. Mechanically, thematically,
Yeah,
aesthetically,
well, yeah, where are the good Gundam
scale-wise.
games?
Armored Core is everything
It
I
seems
could
like
want
such a
out of
perfectly
Gundam game
accessible
and
idea.
more, which
Like, they could
coincidentally
make a
makes it
really
all the
good one.
weirder that FromSoft has developed a number of Gundam-adjacent games that happen to largely completely suck. I'm getting off point here. The point I want to make is that I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that Armored Core has confidently entered the realm of one of my favourite series of all time, rewarding my effort with the same feelings of joy and
That's the
revelation
thing, even if a game
I
is spoiled,
experienced
you can
upon
still have
finally
fun.
getting to grips with Dark Souls. The adoration I have for this series really is that profound. There is no game I am more hyped for than Fires of Rubicon. As stated, it's not nearly as simple as it should be to play these games, but if you are at all curious and are aware of the barriers you'll have to overcome to do so, both technical and philosophical I guess, then especially when the industry has been so replete with game after game that just do absolutely nothing for me, there are few game franchises
video
I
and
could
went, worth 30
recommend
bucks.
diving
Yep.
into head first.
Literally,
more so
50%
than
off is
Armored
a
Core.
crazy discount.
Whew. As I say, this is
All
my
right.
longest video project.
That was pretty good. So I'm going to take a quick pause. I got to go pee. I'm going to grab a snack. But after that, we're going to get into Armored Core.